Hello and thanks for joining us. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. Our top stories this hour. A despicable anti-Semitic act of terror. Israel condemns the abduction and murder of a Chabad rabbi in the UAE. 3 Jordanian police officers injured after a gunman opens fire close to the Israeli embassy in Amman. And Yemeni men are being tricked into fighting alongside Russian troops in Ukraine in a deal between Moscow and a prominent Houthi businessman. Israel has warned its citizens to avoid all non-essential travel to the United Arab Emirates after a prominent rabbi was found murdered in the Gulf state. Rabbi Kogan, an emissary of the Chabad organization, went missing on Wednesday. Authorities here have called his death a despicable anti-Semitic act of terror, while reports suggest Iran may have been involved. More in this report.
The United Arab Emirates, ranked one of the safest countries in the world in 2024, is now grappling with the shocking murder of Rabbi Kogan. The rabbi, a dual Israeli-Moldovan citizen, went missing for days before his body was discovered by Emirati authorities. Kogan was an emissary to Abu Dhabi's Chabad chapter, arriving in the UAE following the normalization of ties between Israel and the Gulf nation in 2020. He also ran a kosher grocery store in Dubai. Details of the murder remain unclear, but Israeli security sources suggest Kogan was being tracked by Iranian intelligence. Israel has condemned his murder as a, quote, despicable anti-Semitic act of terror, and vowed to bring the perpetrators to justice.
I wish to express deep shock on my behalf, on behalf of all the cabinet members, on behalf of the citizens of Israel, and on behalf of the entire Jewish people, over the abduction and murder of Kogan. Of blessed memory, may God avenge his blood. I greatly appreciate the cooperation with the United Arab Emirates in investigating this murder. We will strengthen our ties, particularly in the face of attempts by the axis of evil to harm our peaceful relations.
Kogan's death has also brought back painful memories for his family. He was related to Rabbi Gavriel Holtzberg, who was killed alongside his wife in the 2008 Mumbai Chabad house terror attack. The UAE confirmed on Saturday the rabbi had been missing since Thursday, but refrained from mentioning Kogan's Israeli citizenship, instead identifying him as Moldovan. The UAE has maintained its ties with Israel throughout the war against Hamas in Gaza and remains a key partner under the Abraham Accords. But Rabbi Kogan's murder reminds of the ongoing risks for Israelis and Jews living abroad, even in countries with normalized relations. In response to the killing, Israel has reiterated a level 3 travel warning for the UAE, advising against non-essential travel.
Well, for more on that, let's go now to Dubai, and we're joined by correspondent Brian Rowan. Brian, there's been one statement, as we just heard in that report, from the Emirati authorities about this, and they omit any mention of the fact that Rabbi Kogan was Israeli, or indeed a rabbi. Have they said anything else this afternoon?
Well, so far there's been very little in terms of the actual investigation from the Emirati side. They've said that they've been in touch with the family and the community here and the Moldovan embassy, of which he was a citizen. But the story is still developing, and I wouldn't doubt they'll come out with a statement sometime soon. The UAE in general is a very safe place, and the police are very good at intervening, for example, when CCTV footage is taken, and they sort of show up out of nowhere sometimes, and when there's an incident or an accident. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point there's a video that emerges of suspects, maybe people involved. There was a report that the car was headed towards, his car was found somewhere headed towards Oman. That said, I don't think at the moment anyone in the Arab world is really talking up their good relationship with Israel at the moment, given the Gaza war. So since it started last year, it's just been a very sensitive issue. Gulf governments in general, I think they're pretty open to expanding the relationship with Israel further. You remember not so long ago, they were actually talking about the Saudis potentially getting involved with the Abraham Accords. But remember, the populations here in the Gulf and the Arab countries, they're very upset over what's happening in Gaza, the Palestinian, sort of mass casualties and the civilian deaths, and what they see as a disproportionate response to what happened, started on October 7th. In the meantime, a few other statements have emerged. There's, for example, from foreign affairs advisors. One of them, Dr. Ali Al-Nuaimi, he said he sent his condolences to the Jewish community. He called the death a terrible loss and an affront to human dignity. And he eulogized him. He said, Rabbi Tzvi his life was one of service to the community. Another advisor, Anwar Gagash, he's a former foreign minister. He said, well, he kind of underlined the safe aspects of the UAE and life in places like Dubai, and saying that it's underlining how it's a tolerant culture and an atmosphere of peaceful coexistence. So, there are still travel warnings as far as I know.
Yeah, well, the events of the last 24 hours would say otherwise. But thank you very much, Brian. Brian Rowan there over in Dubai.
Sure.
Well, our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osserman, is with me in the studio. Yes, the UAE has indeed been trying to promote an image of peaceful coexistence, yet a rabbi has been kidnapped and murdered, and we're getting very little in the way of the details of an investigation into what happened.
Yeah, this is a very big embarrassment to Emirati authorities, as you both described. They try to promote this image of open to all cultures, all faiths, freedom of religion, promoting themselves as a business tourism hub. Incidents like this do not help that image. Now, following October 7th, we have seen the local Jewish community in the Emirates kind of lower its profile. On the other hand, we have seen authorities in the Emirates not allow a single pro-Palestinian protest. So they have been trying to keep the streets neutral. Incidents like this that Israeli intelligence is tying to Iran obviously undermine that. Now, it takes us back to 2010, the elimination of senior Hamas operative El Mabhouh in an attack, in an elimination attributed to the Mossad. Back then, that caused a lot of tension between Jerusalem and Abu Dhabi. Following that, they kind of received a promise from Israel that they will not carry out any assassinations, eliminations of its enemies on Emirati soil. In general, in the Gulf, that is the policy, but it's instances like this, attacks like this, that undermine that and put into question Israel's side of that agreement, but also puts into question Emirati-Iranian relations, because at the end of the day, we know that as far as economic ties, Iran is the #1 destination for Emirati exports, and the UAE is #3 for Iranian exports. So it will be interesting to see what this terror attack does to relations between Iran and the United Arab Emirates.
Ariel, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's bring in Asher Friedman. He's the Director for Israel at the Abraham Accords Peace Institute and a Senior Fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security. Thanks for being with us, Asher. And as you know, the Jewish community in the UAE is very small, very close-knit. How do you think that they'll be dealing with this terrible tragedy?
This is a very good evening, Laura. This is a very difficult evening for the Jewish community. The Jewish community has grown, has been thriving over the last number of years, and Chabad has played a very important role in that, in terms of community life, prayer services, kosher food, everything that the Jewish community needs to sort of become one of the thriving Jewish communities in the world today. And this is certainly a very difficult evening. Many people knew Rabbi Kogan very closely, and we're mourning with them here in Israel.
And what do you make of the response then from the Emirati authorities today? Their statement, the statement from the foreign ministry, names Rabbi Kogan as a Moldovan national, no reference to the fact that he was a rabbi or that he was Israeli. Are you confident there will be a proper investigation into this?
I am confident there will be a proper investigation. It appears that the Emirati and the Israeli authorities are working closely together to get to the bottom of this. I agree that the absence of the mention of him being Israeli was noticeable. We have had the statements from very leading figures in the diplomatic space reaffirming the UAE's commitment to tolerance and being a place where people from all different countries and all different religions can live together in tolerance. So I'm confident that the investigation will proceed quickly and thoroughly.
And we've got these unconfirmed reports that Iran was behind all of this and may have used Uzbek nationals to carry out the kidnapping in the UAE and the subsequent murder of Rabbi Kogan. Does that sound like a reasonable theory to you?
We know that Iran is looking to target Jewish and Israeli targets around the world. They've done that before in Asia, in Europe, in South America. It's certainly logical that they would try to target Jewish and Israeli targets in the Middle East as well. Again, we don't know the details yet. I suppose some of them will come to light soon. But we have to remember that Iran was ineffective in targeting Israel directly. Its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, are being degraded, are being driven back. So it's sort of desperate and it's looking for other targets. And one of the targets are innocent Jews around the world.
And Asha, just briefly, do you think that the UAE is still a safe place for Jews and Israelis?
The culture of tolerance, the culture of multilateral understanding, of multicultural, and interreligious understanding is a major part of Emirati culture, and it still remains. And the Emirati authorities are still committed to ensuring that people of all religions and nationalities can live together in peace. So I believe that, yes, it's still a safe place. Obviously, this instance is very disturbing. It's tragic. It's very saddening. And certainly people should listen to the directives from the relevant authorities. But I do think that overall, the UAE is a safe place.
Asha, thank you very much. Asha Fredman there.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Well, to talk more about those reports of Iran's potential involvement in the murder of Rabbi Kogan, we're joined by Jason Brodsky. He's the Policy Director of United Against a Nuclear Iran. And Jason, you were one of the first, I noticed, to pick up on this story. In your opinion, does it have Iran's fingerprints on it?
Yes, it's great to be with you, Laura. I do believe this plot has Iran's fingerprints all over it. Let's not forget the Islamic Republic has an extensive transnational repression apparatus that operates out of the Iranian intelligence ministry and also the IRGC. The Iranian intelligence ministry has carried out operations on UAE soil targeting Iranian diaspora members. For example, Jamshid Sharmad in 2020 was kidnapped from Dubai, sent to Oman and then on to Iran. So this is a very well-worn playbook. And there was also the harming of a British Iranian national in 2013. So this does have Iran's modus operandi all over it. I think that the Islamic Republic is trying to employ these tactics because it preserves plausible deniability, and they hope that it will avoid an Israeli military strike at a time when the air defense system is so exposed in Iran as a result of Israel strikes in October.
All right. Jason, Iran, meanwhile, it's putting out reports today that it will be holding another round of nuclear talks with the European powers later this month. Is that true?
Well, I think, yes, those reports are true, but I do think they are nuclear negotiations. They are talks, preliminary talks, not even talks about talks, according to some reports. The Europeans are interpreting them as just a re-engagement with Tehran. So they're not negotiations, but the Iranians have an interest in hyping such engagements because let's not forget that the rial is plummeting at the moment, and any talk of momentum towards any kind of diplomatic deal with Western powers would help staunch the economic bleeding on that front. So I think we have to keep that all in mind.
Jason, thank you very much indeed. Jason Brodsky there.
Thank you.
Now, it's exactly a year to the day since Hamas released dozens of hostages, all women and children, in exchange for a ceasefire and the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. It took place over several days, you'll remember, a year ago. Today, though, 101 hostages remain in Gaza, and according to Israeli intelligence assessments, around 50 of them are thought to be still alive. Well, our Emily Francis is down at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. She joins us now. And 1 year on, Emily, what hopes do we have of a second hostage release deal?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, Laura. We're actually at the hostage family headquarters here, not in Hostage Square, because they did have a press conference with some of those hostages who were released a year ago in that hostage deal. It is crazy to think that this is another year that we're still here covering the same situation with no sign of life or with a positive outcome. And speaking to the families over the course, of the past year, especially like the Nutras, for example, who I met exactly a year ago, the day of the hostage deal, when they had, so much hope that this would be the beginning of, something that would lead to more releases. We obviously know that has not been the case. So, people are feeling deflated. And, today in particular in the press conference, we heard from some of the hostages who were released, including we heard from, I'm trying to find it, from Raz Ben Ami, and also the cousin of Shiri Bibas. So it was just one of those things to just hear them and to feel their sadness, to feel the fact that, being home really doesn't make that much of a difference, given the fact that there's still 101 hostages that have not returned. So they're also stuck in this limbo where they can't fully appreciate being out of the tunnels, knowing that so many others are about to face the winter season, and surviving is very, very difficult. So again, hard to have hope, but continuing to power forward, because that's the only choice they have.
Exactly. What else can they do? Very hard to imagine how the families manage to keep going in this horrendous situation, but they do.
Yeah.
Emily, thank you. Emily Francis there, down in Tel Aviv. Well, Ariel Osseran is with me in the studio. And Ariel, we get these reports from time to time, don't we, flying around, that we could potentially be near to a deal, that the situation has changed. Hamas is desperate. Hamas wants Gazan civilians to return to the north of the Strip. We've got Turkey trying to get involved, Qatar, Egypt, all the rest of it. Where are we? Is there any hope at all of some kind of breakthrough?
Not as long as there's still talks ongoing in Lebanon. That has taken the diplomatic front stage. And the understanding of all sides is that there is probably no breakthrough expected in Gaza until at least there will be a deal reached in Lebanon. That is expected to be the development that could perhaps affect talks in Gaza, which are completely stalled, more stalled than perhaps they have ever been since the previous round 1 year ago. Hamas today issuing a statement, senior official Sami Abu Zuhri dropping a video statement reiterating Hamas's claims that stopping the war is the top priority. He didn't go into the details of reiterating Hamas's demands, which other spokespeople do reiterate, the demand of a complete cessation of the war and the full withdrawal of Israeli forces before any deal can be talked about. He did not specify that framework as contrary to what other spokespeople we do hear from. So that is perhaps showing some potential that the terror group is indeed interested in an agreement, but the understanding is that until there is a deal reached in Lebanon, not to expect any breakthroughs in Gaza, and probably even after. That is not the optimistic of the two talks, or not talks, potential negotiations that are on the table right now.
Pretty bleak. Ariel, thank you. Ariel Osseran there. A gunman was shot dead in Jordan's capital city, Amman, this Sunday after he opened fire on 3 Jordanian police officers. The shooting happened not far from the Israeli embassy in the affluent Rabbi neighbourhood. With more, here's our correspondent, Robert Swift.
In the early hours, as dawn broke over Amman, a gunman opened fire on a Jordanian police patrol. In the exchange that followed, the shooter was killed and 3 police officers wounded. The incident occurred in Rabia, a wealthy district in Amman that hosts Israel's heavily fortified embassy to Jordan. A direct connection to the embassy has not been demonstrated, but it is not ruled out either, due to frequent protests that take place in the neighborhood against Israel and its military actions in the region. The government of Jordan walks a careful line regarding Israel, often critical of its policies, but less so than some Jordanians would prefer, as seen in its response to the recent International Criminal Court indictments against Israeli leaders.
This is a message to the entire international community that it must take practical steps to stop the massacres being committed in Gaza, to stop the massacres committed against international law, to stop the use of starvation as a weapon.
Many of the country's population are Palestinians or their descendants, expelled during Israel's formation. If indeed this morning's shooting proves to be connected to Israel, it would be yet another politically motivated attack in recent months. In early September, a Jordanian truck driver transiting into the West Bank opened fire at the Allenby crossing, killing 3 Israeli security guards.
Well, with more on that now, Dr. Nasir Al-Amari is a Jordanian writer and political commentator. Great to have you with us, Dr. Al-Amari. So was the Israeli embassy the target, do you think? Because there's nobody working there at the moment.
It may have been. It's not clear if this is a lone wolf attack, an individual who carried out this attack. I doubt that this is an organized operation. Politically, there is a lot of anger, and people in Jordan hear the king and hear his prime minister and his foreign minister talk about genocide committed by Israel, but at the same time, they don't see, shutting down the embassy as an action that would be considered a good response to what they label as genocide. So there is a huge gap between public perceptions of what's happening in Gaza and how the king and his government are handling the situation. They definitely see the hypocrisy. They think the king is too close to Israel. However, he continues to say, I support the Palestinians and I'm trying to give aid to the Palestinians. But that is how far the king is going to go when it comes to Israel. However, the public feels that there's a disconnect between the king and his policies and what's happening in Gaza and in the region.
Yeah, the security situation inside Jordan does seem to be deteriorating, doesn't it? We have seen a string of these incidents. We've also seen attempted infiltrations from Syria. I mean, why doesn't the king go ahead and put his money where his mouth is, so to speak, and just sever ties with Israel? What would he lose from doing that?
Well, the king is a staunch ally of the United States, and he relies on the United States for aid and its allies in the region, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries. So the king is not about to sever these relations. He also has close ties to the Israeli security forces. Coordination between his security apparatus and the Israelis is very strong. So I believe that the king will continue to do what he's doing right now, which is condemn Israel, even allow the media in Jordan to condemn Israel, while simultaneously maintaining this relationship with Israel, because he believes that this relationship with the United States and Israel will probably outlast Hamas and the Iranian influence, and he's hoping that he will come out on the other side of this with a more stable country.
Do you think there's any reason the authorities in Jordan haven't named the gunman yet? He hasn't been identified publicly.
Well, I heard that they're referring to him as a lone wolf. I think that they don't want to give this any political dimension. They probably want to show this person as being, a deranged or a deranged individual. They definitely don't want him to be a martyr. The way the other people who carried out operations against Israel lately have been labeled as martyrs for Palestine. So they definitely want to keep this limited. They want to maintain public support for the security of the country, which is now under a lot of threat from Iran, from the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, who have an alliance with Iran. So this is a very dangerous game for Jordan. And I think the security forces are in full control of the situation. However, this can't last unless if there is a political change in the region to end this violence.
Dr. Nasir El-Amari, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Ariel Osseran, our Middle East correspondent, here with me in the studio. And he's really having to walk a tightrope every day that this war goes on, isn't he, King Abdullah?
Yeah, trying to, on the one hand, absorb the local angry sentiment towards Israel and towards Jordan for maintaining a peace agreement with Israel since 1991. That now is perhaps the period that peace agreement has been most strained. But again, we have not seen really anywhere close to severing that, because the Jordanians, in terms of their national security interests, share the exact same security interests as
They also
Israel.
get a lot of water from Israel, don't they?
They get water from Israel. There is agreements, water for electricity, and they also get a lot of aid from the United States. So they do have to walk that tight line. But at the end of the day, it's a discrepancy between national interests and national sentiment. And it's up to the monarchy to balance the two, when you have the internal political system being more of an outlet for that sentiment rather than from the monarchy, as we just heard.
All right, Ariel, for now, thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, this was the scene in the central city of Petah Tikva. Today, a direct hit from a Hezbollah missile that was fired from Lebanon, one of nearly 200 fired at Israel today. More next.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. And there's been a relentless barrage of missiles fired at Israel this Sunday from Lebanon. One Hezbollah rocket slammed into the central city of Petah Tikva this morning, wounding a woman whose car caught fire. Israel responded with a warning to evacuate buildings in southern Beirut. We'll get an update from the north of Israel in just a moment. But first, this report from our Ariel Osseram.
Ceasefire deal or no, Hezbollah is escalating its attacks on Israel. A Lebanese terror group launched over 200 rockets and drones at Israel by late Sunday afternoon, targeting dozens of communities and cities from the northern border to Haifa and central Israel. A total of 8 people were injured in various impact sites, one of whom in critical condition. Whether a combination of bad weather limiting Israel's ability to track launches or an attempt to save face amid negotiations of its retreat, Hezbollah seems eager to deepen its attacks on Israel.
Netanyahu and the enemy army are stalling, and in the meantime they hope to accomplish additional military achievements and impose their conditions under fire. This will not happen. We are the resistance and we will prevail.
Meanwhile, Israel continued to strike Hezbollah sites and launchers in southern Lebanon and weapons transfer routes in the Bekaa Valley. In Beirut's southern suburb, or Dahia, the IDF issued evacuation warnings before striking buildings housing Hezbollah assets. The Lebanese army said 1 soldier was killed and 18 others wounded in what appears to be an errant Israeli strike. The IDF said it regrets the incident and emphasizes that its fight is against Hezbollah, not against the Lebanese army, and will investigate what happened. Visiting Beirut in his last days as the EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell urged both Lebanon and Israel to reach an immediate ceasefire.
Back in September, I came and I was still hoping that we could prevent a full-fledged war of Israel attacking Lebanon. 2 months later, Lebanon is on the brink of collapse.
As for the Lebanese, many continue to question Hezbollah's continued endangering of ordinary civilians, using them as human shields.
Can we please understand what Hezbollah is doing in our buildings and the homes of innocent people? What is their problem? And why are they still present in areas where there are people who have nothing to do with them?
Well, let's get the latest. Let's go to the north of Israel, and our correspondent Zach Anders is standing by. And Zach, as we've been reporting, a very heavy day of rocket fire. What is the situation like now as night falls?
Hi, Laura. We're here in Haifa. The damage from an earlier rocket attack shown on the building behind me. We have as many as 10 people throughout the country, not just in the north, who have been wounded today by this incessant rocket fire. Some 250 rockets, the IDF says, approximately launched from Lebanon into Israel. Some of these long-range rockets into your direction, into the Tel Aviv area. A lot of them up here in the north, multiple communities, dozens of red alerts throughout the afternoon. It has been a heavy day. Some of these barrages containing dozens of rockets, some of them just one at a time, which certainly is straining the air defense systems on a day like today. It's just a matter of logistics at this point, trying to resupply these different air defense batteries to keep up with the different areas that see the most frequent heavy attacks, complicated by the fact that you guys in the Tel Aviv area have been seeing rockets as well, and the air defense systems working there in that area. One of the more interesting elements of the headlines from today, a rare apology from the IDF. Quote, the IDF regrets the incident and clarifies that it is fighting in a targeted manner against the Hezbollah terror organization. The incident in question, a Lebanese armed forces soldier has been killed, as many as 18 wounded, according to Lebanese reports, and confirmed by the IDF issuing that rare apology that one of the LAF soldiers has been killed in an area near Tyre in southern Lebanon. We don't know very much about the details of the circumstances. The only thing the IDF is telling us at this point is that Hezbollah was in the area as this engagement took place. And it's not entirely clear if these soldiers were wounded by ground fighting or if this was some sort of airstrike from an aircraft or a drone. Either way, it's a very tense and precarious situation to know that the Lebanese armed forces play such a massive role, you would assume, in a potential ceasefire. If you're basing all of the ceasefire talk of the last month on whether or not 1701, the UN resolution, can be implemented, well, that calls for the Lebanese armed forces, the United Nations peacekeepers, to be in southern Lebanon as a buffer to keep Hezbollah out. One of the interesting things, as I was going back through my notes, I found some of the coverage we had back in April when we were talking about the caretaking Prime Minister Makati saying that he couldn't provide the additional Lebanese armed forces, the additional Lebanese troops into southern Lebanon. He said it was logistically impossible. They didn't have the troops. Interestingly, in the last month, he has changed his tone. He has said they're willing to provide LAF soldiers into southern Lebanon. Some figures from Lebanese officials say they're willing to provide as many as 10,000 troops into southern Lebanon. That's not something that's been corroborated by the negotiating team or by the U.S. envoy, Amos Hochstein. Not something he has laid out in these terms. Again, a lot of the terms for a potential ceasefire deal that has been discussed amongst the parties has been largely kept under wraps. But it's an interesting saga to know that either way, this is a player. This is a major player in this equation. Will these troops be supplied into southern Lebanon? Will they be able to match the numbers that are believed to be needed to create a proper buffer to keep Hezbollah out? Well, in a day like today, when their soldiers are also dying, also being wounded by the fight that is taking place, concerned that that adds a new complication to an already very tense, dramatic situation unfolding as to the future of southern Lebanon. Laura.
Zach, thank you very much indeed. Zach Andrews there with all the latest from the north. A very heavy day of attacks from Hezbollah in Lebanon. Ariel Osseran's with me in the studio. Ariel, I believe you have some updates relating to the murder of Rabbi Kogan in the UAE.
Yes, so the Emirati Ministry of Interior issuing a statement now saying that, quote, in record time, the competent Emirati authorities arrested the perpetrators of the murder of the Moldovan citizen, referring to Rabbi Tzvi Kogan, confirming that the UAE remains invincible to those trying to disturb the security of its society. I'm just looking at the statement now to see if they have any additional information. But
are they still referring to him as a Moldovan citizen?
Yeah, the word Israeli doesn't appear
or the word rabbi
in his description. No mention of rabbi, which shows that they're trying to kind of play down this tragic incident, but without indicating the identity of these suspects who were arrested. It appears that the Emirati authorities have, or at least they claim to have, arrested the perpetrators of the murder.
Okay, so one arrest.
Believed to be over the weekend, yeah.
One arrest linked to the murder of Rabbi Kogan.
They're not saying how many suspects were arrested.
There have been
arrested. Three perpetrators.
Three
involved.
arrests.
3 suspects.
Okay, there we are.
Yes.
3 arrests related to the murder of Rabbi Kogan in the UAE. We will, of course, keep you updated on that story when we get more detail. But let's talk more about Israel's war with the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah in Lebanon, because Israel has also been targeting the group's assets and personnel in neighbouring Syria. It is via Syria, from Iran, that the terrorist group receives its weapons. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, that's a UK-based group, claims that at least 90 people were killed in IDF strikes on the city of Palmyra in Syria. It says that dozens of pro-Iran militia members were also killed. That group has been accused of inflating casualty figures in the past. But to talk more about that, Colonel Rich Outson is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a geopolitical consultant for Dragoman LLC. Thanks for being with us, Rich. So, I mean, this represents a massive uptick in attacks on Syria. Is this making a difference when it comes to preventing Hezbollah from rearming?
Well, it may be. It's a little early to tell, but there's been apparently some sort of back-channel negotiations trying to convince Assad that increasingly the mask is off Iran's regional war against Israel and American interests in the region, and they're using Syria quite openly as a launching pad for attacks and as a logistical supply line through to Hezbollah and Lebanon. So there's been pressure exerted and back-channel messaging about this might be a good time for you to stop doing that. There were rumors that Ron Dermer had been both in Moscow and in Washington pressing a plan to dangle sanctions relief for Assad in exchange for him choking off some of the supply lines coming in. But first of all, I don't think he'll do that. Assad is very deeply entwined with both Iran and with Lebanese Hezbollah. And second of all, until he does so, the prudent thing is to continue hitting the pro-Iranian militias, the IRGC, and the Hezbollah forces that are all throughout the depth of Syria.
Well, it seems that Iran has other plans for Syria, and there are some reports that Iran would like its militias to invade Israel from the north via the Golan Heights. Any sign of how the Americans are preparing to respond to that?
Well, we are in very close, that is, the United States military is in very close consultation and cooperation with Israel. As you're aware, whatever the policy level splits between the Democrats and Republicans on fighting in Gaza, on end state, and on potentially limiting symbolically some arms support. In reality, the provision of intelligence support, ammunition support, arms resupply, that sort of thing has really been uninterrupted. And I think this is a bipartisan approval and support for robust support to Israel, because what we're seeing now is a multi-front war launched against Israel from Iran in multiple different directions. So I think what you'll see is as things escalate in Lebanon and in Syria, the United States will continue to robustly provide weapon support, intelligence support. And I think you probably noticed the strike that's been reported against Ali Musa Dakduk. We can talk about that as well if you like, because that's a clear example of where Israel is fighting an enemy that's also targeting the United States. And in that case, it's going to be a very easy sell to Congress and to the public to keep supporting Israel in a robust way.
Quite. Well, tell us more about that cell that was targeted. This is an individual who has American blood on his hands.
Ali Musa Dakduk was born in Beirut, and he is the poster child for how linked Iran's war across Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon against both the United States and Israel, how linked these are. He fought in the 2000s against American forces. He led a raid in 2007 that resulted in the death of 5 Americans, and then he was inexplicably released by corrupt courts in Iraq that were under Iranian influence, apparently. And as a result, he got back into the fight, and he has been one of the prime movers and shakers between Lebanon and Syria, carrying out Iran's bidding. So the fact that he was reportedly killed in an Israeli strike will cause a lot of satisfaction in the United States. Obviously, a lot of bitter feelings in the United States towards the fact that this guy, after he was captured, by the way, by an American raid in 2007, or an American patrol after his raid that killed 5 Americans, he was then released and allowed to go back on the battlefield. So I think that, again, is a poster child for what Iran is up to and how closely intertwined the U.S. and Israeli interests are in pushing back on that Iranian multi-front war.
Well, let's hope people are paying attention over there. Colonel Richardson, great to talk to you as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Saudis, Iranians, Israelis and Palestinians were gathered for a conference over the weekend that was led by the centre-left leader Yair Lapid. Lapid says that the Abraham Accords are the key to ending conflict in the region. Our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini reports.
As war and conflict rage in the Middle East, with a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, a traumatized Israel fighting on 7 fronts, and a Lebanon in the shadow of an Iranian-controlled Hezbollah, the Mitvim Institute for Regional Foreign Policies held a conference on strategies for the future and on the need for hope at a moment where hopelessness is flooding the region.
I think the most important message is that hope is realistic, it's feasible. It's not just some kind of a feeling or wishful thinking. I think that when we are looking at the Israeli public right now, the crucial junctures that we are at, the last couple of days with a discussion about the future of Gaza, a military control of the north part of Gaza, about annexation, we do see, and when we come together, we do see that those ideas are promoted by a minority government. The establishment of a Palestinian state, a demilitarized Palestinian state, as long as it's part of a regional framework with US security support, we see that the idea of a regional alliance that would allow us to deal with Iran in the future, all those things are feasible.
The conference saw a range of public speakers and panels discuss and present specific alternatives to the current political reality of Israel, including Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid, who, amongst other things, called for a regional commission based in Riyadh to present plans for the futures of Lebanon and Gaza, for normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and for a future with the Palestinians.
In an unusual moment, there is a single organizing principle that deals with all the arenas in which Israel is involved. This organizing principle is a so-called normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia. This is a misleading name because it is much bigger than one agreement with one country. It's the construction of an entire regional coalition. Such a regional coalition will be the administrative basis of an alternative government in Gaza. It will assist with the rebuilding of the Lebanese army so that it will stand between us and Hezbollah in the north. It will be a military and economic alliance that will deal with the series of threats that Iran poses, from its nuclear program to the activity of Iranian proxies, from Yemen to Iraq. This diplomatic process must start with a comprehensive hostage agreement in Gaza, which would include a ceasefire for a 6-month transitional period in Gaza and a permanent arrangement in Lebanon. Israel will announce that it has no intention of settling Gaza or staying for years in southern Lebanon, but it reserves the right to defend itself by force beyond its border.
The opposition leader says that within a month, Saudi Arabia will host a conference with Israel, the US, Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco, Lebanon, and the PA, promising a 5-part deal to come out of the meeting. At the conference, speakers discussed issues like diplomatic ways to release the hostages, eco-political sustainability, Israeli-Palestinian peace in a regional perspective, and establishing a regional alliance, among other things. The discussions come less than a month after Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich from the far-right religious Zionism party called for Israel to effectively annex the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
There are 2 paths for Israel right now. We're not going back to managing the conflict, and we can't wait on the fence thinking about the political security big issues after the October 7. There are 2 paths. The path of Smotrich, which is annexation, a continuation of the war, and a coup d'etat in Israel, which its basic meaning is for the long term, is the end of the Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. We're trying to show that there is an alternative.
At a moment where solutions through dialogue seem far away, Israelis repeatedly and consistently protesting for a ceasefire for hostages deal in Gaza, and tens of thousands of residents waiting to return to their homes in the north, the need for hope is big.
This is the pillar of how we can continue to create change. Without hope, we have nothing. We have no reason to wake up and continue doing what we're doing. Same for us, same for a hostage that wakes up every morning, same for an innocent family in Gaza that's suffering and wakes up every morning. What is one thing that we can connect on? Hope. It's a reason to continue, whether you're a thinker or you're a civilian or you're a soldier.
Well, there's further evidence of the ties between Russia and Yemen's Houthis now. Britain's Financial Times newspaper reports today on the presence of hundreds of Yemeni men who are fighting on the front lines in Ukraine. The men say they were promised salaries and a pathway to Russian citizenship. The scheme is linked to a prominent Houthi politician known as Abdul Wali Abdul Hassan al-Jabri. We're here to talk more about all of that. We're joined by Ksenia Svetlova. She's a senior non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much for being with us. So, first of all, according to Britain's Ministry of Defence, Russia has chalked up around 700,000 casualties in its war on Ukraine. It's already recruiting North Koreans, now Yemenis. Can we read this as a sign of desperation?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's very, very clear that Russia is suffering huge losses on the battlefield. It is afraid to announce another official recruitment of young men, fearing the exodus of families, specifically young families from Russia. and it's hugely unpopular step. And I think that they exhorted their other resources, such as, for example, prisoners, whom they recruited about a year, and even more than that. And the prisons are empty now. It's not a joke. It's a true story from many Russian prisons. So now they turn to North Korean, and according to also some reports, not only to Yemenis, but also to Nepalis and some other recruits from other countries in Asia and in the Arab world.
I mean, I'm no military expert, Ksenia, but how can that work on the battlefield when you've got different people from different cultures speaking different languages? I mean, how is that going to help the Russians advance further into Ukraine?
Well, it is unclear, but it seems that desperate times, they require different measures. But we already know from the experience with North Koreans who do not understand, of course, Russian language. There is no common language to communicate with them. And as for the Yemenis that were recruited, many of them never ever served in a regular army. So some of them were part of some militia at some point, but others have absolutely none military expertise. So it seems that also given not only cultural differences, but also the harsh climate of Europe at this time, Eastern Europe, it's very cold in winters, as we know, this whole thing. We don't know how influential it is, how it will be beneficial for Russians. But they're doing what they're doing. What is more troubling is what the Yemeni Houthis are getting from Russia in return to this man. And we know that they were promised weapons. We don't know if these weapons reached the Yemeni shores. But in any case, we are speaking about communication with the terrorist group that is causing a lot of harm on Israel's neighbors, such as Egypt and also Jordan, and it's firing on basically everyone, Western ships that belong to Arab states, Turkey, even China, and so on.
So is this a way for Putin to kind of hit back at the West over the sanctions that he's under because of the war on Ukraine, to embolden the Houthis and get them to disrupt trade even further?
Well, we knew that Russia is cooperating with basically every enemy of the West, and specifically enemy of Israel, also prior to the war in Ukraine. But now its connections to Iran are extremely close. And there is a very close alliance also with Hezbollah over Syria, first of all. And if you add to this Hamas and Houthis, then yes, you have the whole box of cards in this sense. But I think more importantly, we heard today from ex-Russian President Dmitry Medvedev that if America were to give some nuclear weapons to Ukraine, an unlikely scenario that nobody discusses, then would transfer some of its nuclear weapons to American enemies. And who could be the American enemies who need now urgently nuclear weapons? Possibly Iran. So this is one of the most frightening scenarios. With Israel and I think many other countries in the region.
A terrifying prospect indeed. Ksenia Svetlova, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
The world's forgotten conflict now. The Sudanese army has retaken a key territory south of the capital, Khartoum. But after 19 months of fighting, no side is closer to victory, and it's civilians who are paying the price. Tens of thousands have been killed and more than 10 million displaced. Our Lynn Plachmeier has this report.
The Sudanese army has recaptured a key state capital south of Khartoum from the Sudanese Rapid Support Forces as fighting in Sudan's civil war continues. Sinja was held by the RSF for 5 months and is a strategic prize located on a key road linking army-controlled areas of eastern and central Sudan. The Sudanese army has said that Sinja, quote, had been liberated from the terrorist militia. The RSF took the city in a lightning offensive in June that saw nearly 726,000 civilians flee the area, according to the UN. Both sides of the 19-month-old conflict have been accused of war crimes, including shelling homes, markets, and hospitals. The RSF has also been accused of summary executions, systemic sexual violence, and rampant looting. The US sent Tom Perillo, US Special Envoy to Sudan, to the war-torn country last week, after which he said there's not enough, quote, political appetite from the warring parties to reach a resolution to end the conflict.
We have way too many countries that are pouring weapons into Sudan who should be pouring in food and medicine. We have way too many countries deciding to get involved, not in the interest of the Sudanese people, but to take advantage of the fragility of the state. And right now, what we need is the kind of leadership where the region is coming together to say, now is the time for peace, now is the time to remember that even if the war continues, we have to respect international humanitarian law, that food and medicine should be able to get to those who are in harm's way.
On Sunday, at least 15 civilians were killed and 20 others were injured in an artillery attack by the RSF on a marketplace in El Fasher, the capital of the North Darfur state. And so, with over 27,000 people killed and over 14 million people displaced, this deadly conflict is still raging on despite the latest victory by the Sudanese army.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Many thanks indeed for watching. Do stay tuned to I24 News. Nicole Zedek is up next with the rundown. Good night.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
sirens have been non-stop blaring throughout northern and central Israel all day as Hezbollah fires more than 250 rockets from Lebanon. We have our correspondent in northern Israel with the latest. 3 people have been arrested for the killing of a Chabad rabbi in the UAE. An incident sparking concern for Israelis and Jews abroad, with Israel raising its travel warning to the Emirates. And it's been exactly 1 year since the first and only ceasefire and hostage release deal. Yet 1 year later, and 101 hostages are still captive in Gaza. We'll go live to a rally in Tel Aviv demanding an immediate deal. Welcome to The Rundown. I'm Nicole Zedek, live in Tel Aviv. There have been nearly non-stop rocket barrages fired from Lebanon throughout the day. 4 times, sirens have sounded in central Israel alone. Hezbollah has launched some 250 rockets and drones at northern and central Israel, injuring at least 20 people, including 13 Palestinians in the West Bank. Now, today marks an escalation by Hezbollah, and it comes as ceasefire talks seem to be advancing, but aren't quite there yet. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran has more.
Ceasefire deal or no, Hezbollah is escalating its attacks on Israel. A Lebanese terror group launched over 200 rockets and drones at Israel by late Sunday afternoon, targeting dozens of communities and cities from the northern border to Haifa and central Israel. A total of 8 people were injured in various impact sites, one of whom in critical condition. Whether a combination of bad weather limiting Israel's ability to track launches or an attempt to save face amid negotiations of its retreat, Hezbollah seems eager to deepen its attacks on Israel.
Netanyahu and the enemy army are stalling, and in the meantime they hope to accomplish additional military achievements and impose their conditions under fire. This will not happen. We are the resistance, and we will prevail.
Meanwhile, Israel continued to strike Hezbollah sites and launchers in southern Lebanon and weapons transfer routes in the Bekaa Valley. In Beirut's southern suburb, or Dahiya, the IDF issued evacuation warnings before striking buildings housing Hezbollah assets. The Lebanese army said 1 soldier was killed and 18 others wounded in what appears to be an errant Israeli strike. The IDF said it regrets the incident and emphasizes that its fight is against Hezbollah, not against the Lebanese army, and will investigate what happened. Visiting Beirut in his last days as the EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell urged both Lebanon and Israel to reach an immediate ceasefire.
Back in September, I came and I was still hoping that we could prevent a full-fledged war of Israel attacking Lebanon. 2 months later, Lebanon is on the brink of collapse.
As for the Lebanese, many continue to question Hezbollah's continued endangering of ordinary civilians, using them as human shields.
Can we please understand what Hezbollah is doing in our buildings and the homes of innocent people? What is their problem? And why are they still present in areas where there are people who have nothing to do with them?
Let's go straight to the field for an update now from our I-24 News correspondent, Zach Anders, who's joining us live from Haifa in northern Israel. Zach, we've seen more than 250 rockets fired towards northern and central Israel throughout the day, multiple impact sites, multiple people injured as well. So from there in Haifa, what are you seeing and what are you hearing?
Hi, Nicole. Yeah, the important thing, no one has died today from these rocket attacks, but some of the heaviest we've seen. There's been periods where there's been dozens of rockets. There's been periods where there's been just one at a time. There's over 100 communities across Israel that have seen a red alarm today. You talk to people up here in Haifa, they're describing how their kids were at school when an alarm went off, and then they came home to their neighborhood and the alarms come off again, and the rockets are hitting into this apartment complex behind me. Nighttime here, so hard to see the damage, of course, but significant. A lot of windows blown out. We're still waiting from word for the IDF whether or not we're going to learn about what exact rocket was used. This is kind of hit or miss sometimes with the IDF, whether or not they will tell us what exactly was being fired here, or whether or not this was a intercepted rocket or a full impact. The people here are describing this as a direct hit, but we don't have official confirmation yet. Very heavy day, and perhaps as you look at what's been taking shape across the last 48 hours in Beirut, the strikes in that city, they've been in Dahia in the southern suburb, they've been in central Beirut, they've come with a warning for evacuations, they've come without warnings. And as Ariel described in this last report, these airstrikes have been all throughout the country. Hezbollah has been hit very hard, but they're not the only ones that are suffering casualties today. In a rare statement, the IDF has issued an apology to the Lebanese armed forces. A Lebanese armed forces soldier was killed, as many as 18 others wounded, according to Lebanese reports. In some earlier exchange today near the southern Lebanese city of Tyre, the IDF saying, quote, the IDF regrets the incident and clarifies that it is fighting in a targeted manner against the Hezbollah terror organization and not against the Lebanese army. This incident took place in an area where the fighting is ongoing against the Hezbollah terror organization. Again, a rare apology and admission from the IDF as to their involvement in an incident. It's still not entirely clear whether or not this was an airstrike or some sort of engagement that was taking place on the ground. But as you look at what is taking shape with the ceasefire, one of the main players involved is the LAF. These soldiers are going to need to be, based on both what the Israelis are saying and the Lebanese are saying, they're going to need to be the buffer, like in the original 2006 agreement with UNSC 1701. Those soldiers are supposed to be the ones in southern Lebanon with UN peacekeepers, keeping Hezbollah out. There's been wide hesitation from Lebanese political figures to deploy, to provide additional resources for the LAF in southern Lebanon. So that's already on shaky ground. In an instant like this today, certainly is going to be a wide, controversial moment inside Lebanese politics, already tearing apart that very frayed fabric within that parliament, within the different figures who are attempting to put a ceasefire together and supply these troops. Again, those troops have seen multiple incidents, but this has by far been the most severe, with one LAF soldier dead, as many as 18 others wounded. Nicole.
Certainly seems to be an active day on both the Israeli and the Lebanese side. Zach Anders with that update from Haifa. Thanks so much. Now, for more, I want to introduce my studio guests. I'm joined by Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conriquez, the former international spokesperson for the IDF, as well as a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and our I-24 News Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osirian. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us this evening. I was just reading, there have been more than 540 alarms throughout Israel all day today. The last time we saw this level of alarms in Israel was following the death of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. So when we're looking at this, the timing of it, Jonathan, I'm curious, why are we seeing this type of activity from Hezbollah right now?
I agree. It was when after Hassan Nasrallah was eliminated, and then on the 40-day anniversary, they made a significant effort to kind of bring that message of we are still here and we still have capabilities. And I think that what this Iranian aligned terrorist organization is doing now is, again, trying to send a message and probably trying to influence negotiations and to send a message to their domestic audiences, as well as to try to pressure Israeli leadership to perhaps move closer towards their demands and to improve Hezbollah's standing in the negotiations. That's the sense that I make of it. It is inconvenient, it is threatening, it is horrible for Israelis to have to run for shelter multiple times over the day, children at schools, people in hospitals, people at work, etc. But at the end of the day, if we keep this within proportions, air defenses have worked, and they've worked very well, intercepted the vast majority of incoming rockets. Yes, there have been hits inside Israel, but the amount of rockets versus the amount of damage, a lot of effort by Hezbollah, but falling very, very short of what I think they're trying to do, and that is to kill Israelis, unfortunately not able to do so.
It certainly seems to be a lot of success in there, but there is one instance that we were talking about, Ariel, and that's the fact that 13 Palestinians in the West Bank were injured by one of these rocket barrages. The same people that Hezbollah claims that they are fighting for, they are also injuring. This is indiscriminate firing right now.
Right, so this is, we have seen similar instances when, for instance, the latest Iranian missile strike had landed directly on a Palestinian in Jericho, killing him. Regarding this incident, a security source just saying now that the cause for the injuries in Tulkarm was not as a result of an intercepted rocket, but rather an IED that exploded in a residential building and causing 13 injuries. What we're seeing right now, that's according to the Palestinian Red Crescent. So they initially tried to present it as if this was caused by an Israeli interceptor, which still means that it was caused by a Hezbollah missile, but this appears to be what they call in Israel a botched internal incident that we know that in the camps in the northern part of the West Bank, there ample IEDs spread all across the streets, also inside residential buildings. This is what Israeli forces who have been operating in the West Bank nearly on a nearly daily basis for over 2 years now. This is what they're operating against, trying to prevent these explosive devices from being used against Israeli security forces, Israeli civilians. Here we see they were
I want to tell our viewers right now what we're seeing right now are some live images from Beirut. Our producer just noticed a large barrage being fired from there as well. So we continue to see this as well. So taking a look at the night sky over Beirut in Lebanon. When we're talking about possibly the Israeli response to everything that we've seen today, what should we expect? Because as we've already mentioned, we're continuing to see many of these strikes deep inside Beirut, inside southern Lebanon as well. And so what more type of a response should Israel have to today's attacks?
So what Israel has been doing so far is attacking Hezbollah's critical assets, peeling away layer after layer of Hezbollah's most important strategic assets underneath buildings in the southern part of Beirut. That's one. They're long-distance missiles, they're research and development, they're shore-to-sea missiles, and other advanced weaponry that they've been hiding under civilians there. That's one part. Second part, the northeastern part of Lebanon, their logistics capabilities, their fuel storages, and many other very important logistics that they have up in Baalbek and in that area. Israel has been attacking the border crossings, making it more difficult for Hezbollah to continue to replenish what they either use or that Israel blows up. But I think that, and of course Israel has been taking out commanders, leadership, and other parts of infrastructure. Where I think this is going is, and I hear Israeli officials making quite overt threats towards the Lebanese state, is that we may be escalating it now, not only towards targets that belong to Hezbollah, but maybe targets that are also related to the Lebanese state. Because up until now, Israel has been attacking a lot of Hezbollah targets. Maybe as a result of today's rocket fire, Israel will expand that and include additional targets that so far have been off the map.
I just want to note that we don't really have to guess too much because Avichai Edrei, IDF spokesperson in Arabic, issuing immediate evacuation warnings to residents in certain areas in southern Beirut to evacuate. A total of no fewer than 10 buildings are received immediate evacuation warnings, so we can expect an active night in Beirut's southern suburb, the Hezbollah stronghold in the Lebanese capital. All the while, Israel continuing to avoid targeting the international airport in Beirut that runs ceaselessly, whereas Hezbollah continues to target the Ben Gurion airport, which today for about 30 minutes was not operating.
An important point about that, movement of civilians, and when Shiite population in Lebanon has to move, evacuate themselves from their homes and villages and to go somewhere else, in search of security. That is also, in my mind, an important point when it comes to the negotiations and the internal pressure that is applied by Israel on the Lebanese terrorist organization. That may be part of the equation and also part of the negotiations.
We'll certainly have to see exactly what comes out of the ongoing negotiations when it comes to a ceasefire to end exactly what we have been seeing throughout the day. Now, I want to switch gears and talk about another story, as it's been less than 12 hours since officials announced Israeli Rabbi Zvi Kogan was murdered in the UAE. And now the Emirati Interior Ministry says authorities have arrested 3 people in response to Kogan's killing. Israel had raised the travel warning to anyone heading to the United Arab Emirates, with Israeli authorities calling the killing a, quote, despicable anti-Semitic act of terror, and reports suggesting Iranian intelligence may have been involved. Here's more.
The United Arab Emirates, ranked one of the safest countries in the world in 2024, is now grappling with the shocking murder of Rabbi Zvi Kogan. The rabbi, a dual Israeli-Moldovan citizen, went missing for days before his body was discovered by Emirati authorities. Kogan was an emissary to Abu Dhabi's Chabad chapter, arriving in the UAE following the normalization of ties between Israel and the Gulf nation in 2020. He also ran a kosher grocery store in Dubai. Details of the murder remain unclear, but Israeli security sources suggest Kogan was being tracked by Iranian intelligence. Israel has condemned his murder as a, quote, despicable anti-Semitic act of terror, and vowed to bring the perpetrators to justice.
I wish to express deep shock on my behalf, on behalf of all the cabinet members, on behalf of the citizens of Israel, and on behalf of the entire Jewish people, over the abduction and murder of Zvi Kogan. Of blessed memory, may God avenge his blood. I greatly appreciate the cooperation with the United Arab Emirates in investigating this murder. We will strengthen our ties, particularly in the face of attempts by the axis of evil to harm our peaceful relations.
Kogan's death has also brought back painful memories for his family. He was related to Rabbi Gavriel Holtzberg, who was killed alongside his wife in the 2008 Mumbai Chabad house terror attack. The UAE confirmed on Saturday the rabbi had been missing since Thursday, but refrained from mentioning Kogan's Israeli citizenship, instead identifying him as Moldovan. The UAE has maintained its ties with Israel throughout the war against Hamas in Gaza and remains a key partner under the Abraham Accords. But Rabbi Kogan's murder reminds of the ongoing risks for Israelis and Jews living abroad, even in countries with normalized relations. In response to the killing, Israel has reiterated a level 3 travel warning for the UAE, advising against non-essential travel.
Well, for more, we're joined now by Brian Rohan, an I-24 News contributor at our studio in Dubai. Brian, I want you to just tell us the reaction coming out of the UAE right now, because there's been two statements from the Emirati authorities, but they have not mentioned the fact that Rabbi Kogan was Israeli. They call him Moldovan. Even when they announced that 3 people have been arrested in his killing, they praise this quick, fast-paced arrest, yet they still call him Moldovan. And so why is this messaging we're hearing from the UAE right now?
Well, I think that's due to the fact that everybody in the Gulf and the Middle East is trying to play down a bit their relationships with Israel. It's a hot topic. He was here on a Moldovan passport. They were quite quiet about it until recently, and just a few minutes ago they put out a statement. It was the Interior Ministry who did, basically saying that they'd arrested 3 suspects in the case after the body was found earlier today. And they said that they would, quote, respond decisively and without leniency to any actions that undermine societal stability. So in terms of the actual investigation, so far there's been few details from the Emirati side. They said it earlier that they were on the case from the very beginning. They were in touch with the family and the community and the Moldovan embassy. And there have been some Israeli reports that mention Uzbek nationals as suspects being taken in, but that's more from the Israeli side. On the Emirati side, it's still developing. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next day, a couple of days, there's further statements that come out. The UAE is, in general, a very secure space. They're also very highly skilled, the authorities, the police here, at digging into CCTV footage and showing up on the scene of incidents or accidents very quickly. Sometimes they seem to just pop out of nowhere. So I wouldn't be surprised if later, sometime soon, some video emerges of the suspects either sort of being involved in the kidnapping or somehow the tracking of Rabbi Tzvi. Now, yeah, as for the sensitivities, since the Gaza war started last year, it's been a very difficult issue for the Arab countries and the Gulf governments in general. I feel that I think they're really open to taking the relationship further. There was talk even last year of before pre-October 7th of the Saudis joining the Abraham Accords. But remember, these populations, they're very upset over what's happening to Gaza and Palestinian civilians, the mass casualties, etc., and what they see as a very disproportionate response to the October 7th attacks. So in the meantime, there's a couple other statements that came out from senior Emiratis. One of them, Dr. Ali Al-Nuaimi, he's a foreign policy advisor. He sent condolences to the Jewish community. He referred to Tzvi as a rabbi, and he spoke of a terrible loss, and he eulogized him. He spoke of him as somebody who had dedicated his life to service to the community. I know I've heard about the sort of travel warning. Is it safe for the Jewish community here? Well, they do take the security of the Jewish community seriously in the UAE. You remember the whole opening up that came with the Abraham Accords 4 years ago. And that normalization, that opening, it's a key element of the UAE's encouragement of tolerance. And they surely want to protect the community here and see it thrive. For something like this to happen in the UAE, it's really in no one's interest. And I'm sure that they'll be doing their utmost to make sure something like this doesn't happen again anytime soon.
Let's certainly hope that is
before October 7th.
The case. As the travel warning has been raised, as you mentioned, and it does seem that authorities are on high alert there. Brian Rohan, thank you so much for breaking down exactly what is happening in the UAE right now. Now, I want to come back in here in studio as we do unfortunately continue to see Israel having to raise the level of travel warning right now for many places, but especially with the UAE right now. I have to say, I was in Dubai earlier this month, and I came back just noting how safe I felt there. Yet right now, Israel is saying no non-essential travelers should be going there. And so is this something that Israelis have to continue to worry about, Jonathan, hiding their different Jewish and Israeli identities when they go to different Arab countries, perhaps?
Well, not only to Arab countries, unfortunately. I mean, I travel a lot and I hear the same words of advice or words of caution, either by local authorities, local Jewish security authorities in North America and in Europe. I hear the same things now being said by Israeli authorities regarding Israelis in East Asia. We've had terror attacks and warnings in Sri Lanka and in Thailand and in India and now in Arab countries as well. The modus operandi of the Iranians, since they're failing to hit high-quality targets in Israel, and since they haven't been able to build that infrastructure of hitmen and real actionable capabilities on the ground inside Israel, they're looking for soft targets around the world, soft Jewish targets that are difficult to defend and easy for them to use. And what they're doing, they're not really sending Iranian operatives because that would put Iranians at risk, and they're using thugs, organized crime, and criminals, many times not of very high level and capacity and sophistication. So what we've seen is that local authorities all around the world, with Mossad help and other Israeli involvement, have been able to thwart 99% of those attacks. And unfortunately, if this is really what has happened, one attack actually succeeded, and we have an Israeli casualty, which is very sad and regrettable. But this is months, if not years, of Iranian attempts to try to hit Jewish and Israeli targets that unfortunately now succeeded.
And the majority have been thwarted, as you mentioned. Now, meanwhile, this morning in Jordan, there was a shootout between police and a gunman in the capital of Amman, and that was very close to the Israeli embassy. Now, at this point, it doesn't appear there was a direct link, but the Rabbi district where the embassy is located is also the scene of frequent protests against Israel. Our correspondent Robert Swift has more.
In the early hours, as dawn broke over Amman, a gunman opened fire on a Jordanian police patrol. In the exchange that followed, the shooter was killed and 3 police officers wounded. The incident occurred in Rabia, a wealthy district in Amman that hosts Israel's heavily fortified embassy to Jordan. A direct connection to the embassy has not been demonstrated, but it is not ruled out either, due to frequent protests that take place in the neighborhood against Israel and its military actions in the region. The government of Jordan walks a careful line regarding Israel, often critical of its policies, but less so than some Jordanians would prefer, as seen in its response to the recent International Criminal Court indictments against Israeli leaders.
This is a message to the entire international community that it must take practical steps to stop the massacres being committed in Gaza, to stop the massacres committed against international law, to stop the use of starvation as a weapon.
Many of the country's population are Palestinians or their descendants, expelled during Israel's formation. If indeed this morning's shooting proves to be connected to Israel, it would be yet another politically motivated attack in recent months. In early September, a Jordanian truck driver transiting into the West Bank opened fire at the Allenby crossing, killing 3 Israeli security guards.
Now we are going out for a quick break here on The Rundown, but don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're going to bring you a live update from one of the demonstrations of the hostages' families demanding an immediate deal right now, as it's been 1 year since the first and only hostage release deal in Gaza. We'll have all of that and unpack way more when we come back here on The Rundown. Stick with us.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at Israel-Bonds.com.
Welcome back to The Rundown. Thanks for sticking with us. Now, today marks 1 full year since the first and only hostage release deal, where Hamas released 105 kidnapped civilians over a week-long truce deal in exchange for 240 Palestinian security prisoners. Now, 1 full year and no real movement on a ceasefire deal since. But that's something family members of the remaining 101 hostages are saying must change. There was a demonstration tonight where several of the former hostages and survivors released in the November 2023 deal spoke, along with family members of the hostages still captive in Gaza. And they're demanding an immediate deal to the return of all of the hostages in one single phase. Well, for more, let's get an update from Tel Aviv, where our correspondent Emily Francis has been all evening speaking to some of those family members. Emily, another grim milestone marked today. And so what is the message right now coming from the Hostages Family Forum tonight?
Hi, good evening, Nicole. And, you know, that's right. It's weird. I woke up this morning and saw it was a year anniversary of a Facebook story of mine from the first hostage deal. And I literally started my day saying, I just cannot believe that, you know, here we are a year later and in the same exact situation. So we are at the location of the headquarters of the Hostage and Missing Family Forum, where we did hear from a few of the released hostages, those that were released in the first deal. Among them, we heard from Danielle Aloni, who shared, saying, you know, it took the Israel government 2 months to secure a deal with me and the other hostages. Why is it taking over a year to reach another deal? She talked about as well the feeling of the suffocation, the horrible humidity, the stench, and all of the sensations that they felt. You know, so the main crux is not only them talking about how their nightmare and their terror is still lingering after they have been out of captivity for a year, but also as the remaining hostages are about to go into the dead of winter, the second winter, with them, you know, at least being half of their body weight. It's a very, very scary situation, and the families are really just, you know, they're just, at this point, it's hard to keep fighting, but it's each other and the support that is keeping them going. We did have an opportunity a little earlier to speak to Varda Ben Baruch, who is the grandmother of hostage Don Alexander, the lone soldier who was living in New Jersey, and here's what she had to say.
As a religious woman, I have to believe there is hope. Faith strengthens me. I'm sending Idan messages to keep him strong, to be strong, to survive. It's coming soon. Hold on. And I don't want to let bad thoughts enter my head, only good things. With God's help, I believe we have to do some intercession, both the Lord Almighty above, from below, our government, Mr. Bibi Netanyahu, to forge a deal speedily.
A grim milestone indeed, it seems. Emily Francis giving us the latest and speaking to those family members. Thank you so much for bringing us the latest details on the ground. Now, still with me here in studio is our I-24 News Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaron, as well as Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves, Jonathan Conricus. Gentlemen, when it comes to chances of a deal, it seems for the moments they've kind of been put on the back burner as our attention is still focused on the northern front. Yet these hostages families, they want to see an immediate deal and a one-phase deal as well, where all of the hostages are released at once rather than a phase one that we saw 1 year ago in November. But Jonathan, what are the chances of something like that truly happening, and how do we get the ball rolling again when it comes to chances of a deal?
You know, that's the question that I'm being asked the most by Jews around the world. And I think that my answer is a very sad one. I think that the chances are slim for two main reasons. The most important one, Hamas doesn't want it, and they are not going to release our hostages because they are going to try to hold on to them and to have them as their last insurance policy and a lifeline. And two, because in the priorities and the very difficult choice, the strategic choice that Israel has to make between, in Israel's eyes, defeating Hamas and unseating them from government or getting the hostages back. Official Israel may not have said it and may not officially say so, but official Israel has made a decision to go for defeating Hamas and not for making a deal. And therefore, these two reasons bring horrible sorrow and tremendous suffering and pain to the families and to so many countless other people around the world who care about the fate of the hostages. But the sad reality, I think the very cold reality, is one where I think that the chances for such a deal are very slim. I do not see any activity by the negotiations team. I do not see political pressure. And most importantly, all of the other Israeli efforts aren't working. Israeli troops are not conducting search and rescue missions, and the political pressure isn't there. So bottom line, I wish really to be wrong on this, but I don't think that we're going to see an important deal made anytime soon.
Well, we might not see a deal. We still are hearing some efforts coming from the Israeli government, from Netanyahu himself, who just last week announced that offering $5 million to any Gazan or Hamas terrorist who is willing to pass over a hostage, and they'll get free passage out of Gaza as well. But Ariel, it doesn't seem like this type of a deal is, on the one hand, working, and we're also hearing criticism from Israel as well, from some of the family members who don't want to see this type of incentive being put in place.
Yeah, look, that's not really a diplomatic solution, but trying to look for some sort of silver bullet that will, in an instant, solve the problem. But unfortunately, this problem is a lot more complex. I do think that we should not expect any breakthrough until there is an agreement with Lebanon, and even after, because the hope among American mediators and also Israel is that if there is the goal was to decouple ceasefire talks in Gaza and Lebanon. That has happened, and so the hope is that some breakthrough in Lebanon could trickle down to some sort of breakthrough in Gaza. But the two aren't really comparable, because in Lebanon you have a sovereign state that was taken over, undermined by Iran's proxy, its strongest proxy, at least until recent months. That was Hezbollah. In Gaza, Hamas is the sovereign, and so if Israel's goal, as Jonathan says, is to dethrone Hamas, in the absence of putting someone in their stead, the seat will not remain empty. And so Hamas is holding on to their governance in the Gaza Strip as hard as they can. Israel continues to degrade their military capabilities, but as far as the civil rule, they're the only address there, and they are continuing to operate as the only civil sovereign in the Gaza Strip. And so if we're talking about diplomatic ways to solve this issue in Gaza, that needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, I agree with Jonathan's grim view as to the horizon for such an opportunity in the Gaza Strip. I do think there's a lot more cause for optimism regarding ending or at least ceasing the conflict temporarily with Hezbollah in the north. That will open a whole other chest of problems that we will be discussing if and when that happens. But at the end of the day, the situation in Gaza is a lot less optimistic, and the families are waiting for some glimmer of hope that doesn't appear to be coming anytime soon.
A grim outlook, unfortunately, indeed. Now I want to talk about news coming out of the United States and Israel, of course, as there is a new Israeli ambassador to the United States, as the cabinet unanimously approves Yahya Later to assume the position on January 24th, after Donald Trump returns to the White House. Now, Later was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and moved to Israel in 1978, where he since worked as an official in Netanyahu's office and for the West Bank settlement movement. Well, to discuss this more, I'm joined now by Dan Raviv, co-author of Spies Against Armageddon, Inside Israel's Secret Wars, joining us from Washington, D.C. Dan, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Sure, my pleasure, Nicole.
Now, later is going to be assuming this position at a pretty contentious time in Israel, obviously with the ongoing war, but also with the United States as its role in supporting Israel in this war. And so how will later possibly help or even hurt this crucial relationship that we see between the U.S. and Israel?
Nicole, I think that he fits in very nicely with the incoming U.S. administration. Donald Trump will be sworn in as president on January 20th, 57 days from now, and almost every member of the incoming Trump administration has expressed pro-Israel views. Some of them even saying that Israel can do whatever it wants to in Gaza, leave it up to the Israelis, and whatever restrictions President Joe Biden put on how Israel can use U.S. weapons. Well, the Trump administration indicates it's not going to have those restrictions. So having a new Israeli ambassador in town who is thought of as a hardliner, supporting the settlers, someone who wants to keep the West Bank apparently in Israeli hands, will fit in quite nicely. Consider, by the way, that Mike Huckabee, a Christian evangelist, politician, and broadcaster in this country, has been chosen to be the new U.S. ambassador in Jerusalem. And Huckabee has said that there's no such thing as the occupied West Bank. He's totally pro-Israeli. Again, the relationship is definitely going to be run by President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. But in their ambassadors, they have what folks would call hardliners who would get along extremely well. Good news, at least for the right wing, if I can say that, in Israel, Nicole.
Well, you mentioned just the Trump administration's views, likely going to be more lenient when it comes to even settler expansion, certainly compared to the Biden administration, who over the past several years has really been trying to crack down on what we're seeing in the West Bank. And so later himself part of the West Bank settlement movement. And could this even impact anything more with the Trump administration's view, or does it really just fall in line with it, as you said?
Yeah, I would say fall in line, but what the Israeli ambassador here in Washington gets to do is give speeches and have meetings with officials of the U.S. government and also with members of Congress who love meeting the ambassador from Israel. For the past few years, that has been a professional diplomat and military man, Mike Herzog, who is the brother, by the way, of Yaakov Herzog, the Israeli president. Herzog has been a centrist. He could represent the last Israeli government led by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, and now he could represent the Netanyahu government. Leiter also will be a big speech maker, I'm sure of that. Conservative Jews in this country will enjoy meeting him and hearing from him. Liberal Jews, and liberals are still the majority based on how they voted in the presidential election, many of them are not going to like him and what he has to say about the future. But one thing to keep in mind, we probably are headed toward a period of possible change, big movement in the Middle East. And Donald Trump is close to Saudi Arabia. Donald Trump wants to make a deal. He wants the wars in Lebanon and Gaza to end. So we're not sure what Trump will demand of Israel. This new ambassador, Yechiel Leiter, will be in the middle, but it's mostly between Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu.
A very interesting perspective, as always. Dan Raviv, thank you so much for breaking down exactly what this appointment means for both Israel and the United States.
Sure thing.
Now, as we were speaking about the West Bank, over the weekend there were dozens of settlers who hurled stones at Israeli troops and border police near the West Bank settlement of Itamar. This has been happening more and more frequently. Just one day earlier, Jewish extremists tried to attack IDF Central Command head Major General Avi Bluth in Hebron. Well, now Prime Minister Netanyahu is condemning the violence, along with newly appointed Defense Minister Israel Katz. However, both of these violent incidents happened after Katz announced on Friday he's ending administrative detention orders for West Bank settlers, a decision praised by many of the right-wing lawmakers. Well, coming back here in studio, I'm curious, Jonathan, to hear your perspective, because on the one hand, we are hearing words of condemnation, but many people say actions speak louder than words. And so what type of a crackdown, or absolutely no crackdown, should we expect from the defense minister right now, especially following that switch from Gallant, the former defense minister's role, when it did come to detaining West Bank settler violence?
I think it's very problematic, and I would echo the words of Avi Dichter and others who openly say, and these are Likud members who have openly said that this isn't a smart move, this isn't the right message, and this isn't something that should be done, definitely not now when tensions are pretty high in Judea and Samaria, when there's lots of extremist Jewish activity, and where there's of course lots and lots of Palestinian terrorist activity. The last thing that we need is for another measure that the Israeli defense establishment has in its hands to be taken away, and those are those administrative orders that have been around for quite a while and have been used by Israeli security forces, Shabak and Israeli police mostly. Sends a very bad message, and I think it also feeds into a lot of anti-Israeli rhetoric, saying that there's one law for Israelis and another law for Arabs there. And that's not a good look either. That is concerning, and I don't think that it will lead into good things. And one could say that the writing would now be on the wall, the next attack that will happen by Jewish extremists, which are a small and quite disgusting minority, and we shouldn't paint all of the Israelis living in Judea and Samaria as people like that, but they are a minority that is very ideologically radical, and they are not afraid of doing extremist things. And as such, I think the Israeli institution needs to fight them with quite harsh measures. And that is not what we're seeing now.
But in the meantime, then, since there's no harsh measures, should we expect more and more of these violent incidences?
I think that's likely, because if I were to interpret it, if I was an extremist settler, then I would say, well, okay, one less thing to worry about, and I'm being given the indication that I can do more.
Certainly, free reign, possibly, it seems, for some of these settlers, but as you mentioned, a small minority, it does seem, but certainly something that we do have to talk about. Jonathan Conriquez and Ariel Osaran, thank you for giving us your insight into all of the developing stories that are happening, not only here in Israel, but around the Middle East right now. Thanks for being with us on The Rundown. Now, as protests continue on Israel's streets, calling for a ceasefire for hostages deal and an end to the war in Gaza, the country's political and academic center left presented alternatives to the current reality of the wars in the Middle East at a major conference called Strategies for Hope. Opposition leader Yair Lapid was one of the speakers and presented a plan for a regional commission in Saudi Arabia to end the wars in both Lebanon and Gaza, and for how Israelis and Palestinians can come to a solution. Our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has the report.
As war and conflict rage in the Middle East, with a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, a traumatized Israel fighting on 7 fronts, and a Lebanon in the shadow of an Iranian-controlled Hezbollah, the Mitvim Institute for Regional Foreign Policies held a conference on strategies for the future and on the need for hope at a moment where hopelessness is flooding the region.
I think the most important message is that hope is realistic, it's feasible. It's not just some kind of a feeling or wishful thinking. I think that when we are looking at the Israeli public right now, the crucial junctures that we are at, the last couple of days with a discussion about the future of Gaza, a military control of the north part of Gaza, about annexation, we do see, and when we come together, we do see that those ideas are promoted by a minority government. The establishment of a Palestinian state, a demilitarized Palestinian state, as long as it's part of a regional framework with US security support, we see that the idea of a regional alliance that would allow us to deal with Iran in the future, all those things are feasible.
The conference saw a range of public speakers and panels discuss and present specific alternatives to the current political reality of Israel, including Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid, who, amongst other things, called for a regional commission based in Riyadh to present plans for the futures of Lebanon and Gaza, for normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and for a future with the Palestinians.
In an unusual moment, there is a single organizing principle that deals with all the arenas in which Israel is involved. This organizing principle is a so-called normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia. This is a misleading name. because it is much bigger than one agreement with one country. It's the construction of an entire regional coalition. Such a regional coalition will be the administrative basis of an alternative government in Gaza. It will assist with the rebuilding of the Lebanese army so that it will stand between us and Hezbollah in the north. It will be a military and economic alliance that will deal with the series of threats that Iran poses, from its nuclear program to the activity of Iranian proxies, from Yemen to Iraq. This diplomatic process must start with a comprehensive hostage agreement in Gaza, which would include a ceasefire for a 6-month transitional period in Gaza and a permanent arrangement in Lebanon. Israel will announce that it has no intention of settling Gaza or staying for years in southern Lebanon, but it reserves the right to defend itself by force beyond its border.
The opposition leader says that within a month, Saudi Arabia will host a conference with Israel, the US, Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco, Lebanon, and the PA, promising a 5-part deal to come out of the meeting. At the conference, speakers discussed issues like diplomatic ways to release the hostages, eco-political sustainability, Israeli-Palestinian peace in a regional perspective, and establishing a regional alliance, among other things. The discussions come less than a month after Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich from the far-right religious Zionism party called for Israel to effectively annex the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
There are 2 paths for Israel right now. We're not going back to managing the conflict, and we can't wait on the fence thinking about the political security big issues after the October 7. There are 2 paths. The path of Smotrich, which is annexation, a continuation of the war, and a coup d'etat in Israel, which its basic meaning is for the long term, is the end of the Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. We're trying to show that there is an alternative.
At a moment where solutions through dialogue seem far away, Israelis repeatedly and consistently protesting for a ceasefire for hostages deal in Gaza, and tens of thousands of residents waiting to return to their homes in the north, the need for hope is big.
This is the pillar of how we can continue to create change. Without hope, we have nothing. We have no reason to wake up and continue doing what we're doing. Same for us, same for a hostage that wakes up every morning, same for an innocent family in Gaza that's suffering and wakes up every morning. What is one thing that we can connect on? Hope. It's a reason to continue, whether you're a thinker or you're a civilian or you're a soldier.
We want to remind you of our top story of this hour, and that's all of the activity we've seen out of northern Israel today. These are some live images of Beirut in Lebanon right now as we continue to see different reports of explosions there. It was just at the top of this broadcast that the IDF issued evacuation orders to 10 buildings in Beirut's southern suburb, calling on civilians to immediately evacuate at least 500 meters away from these buildings as they go after Hezbollah assets in the area, as Hezbollah has already fired some 250 rockets and projectiles towards not only northern Israel but central Israel as well throughout the day. And now the IDF expecting a possible strong response in Beirut. That is the top story that we have for you on this hour of the Rundown. But this next story, we're going to end on a little bit of a lighter note, as it shows a rare moment of cultural openness. Right now, Iran's Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art is showcasing a collection of Western art that hasn't been seen by the public in decades. The exhibit is called Eye to Eye and offers a glimpse into a hidden treasure trove of masterpieces, while subtly reflecting societal changes in the Islamic Republic. Take a look.
A surprising sight in Tehran, large crowds waiting eagerly outside the Museum of Contemporary Art. Inside, the underground galleries have unveiled a stunning exhibition featuring over 120 works by celebrated Western and Iranian artists. Among the highlights are Andy Warhol's iconic silkscreens, including Jacqueline Kennedy II, a striking image of the former US First Lady in mourning. Pieces by Picasso, Francis Bacon, and also many others by Warhol are on display, drawing art lovers and selfie takers alike.
The first feeling that came to me, and I told my parents, was that I can't believe I'm seeing these works, which have always been kept far from our eyes.
Built during the reign of Iran's Western-backed Shah Reza Pahlavi in the 1970s, the museum once elevated Iran's cultural status. But after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the priceless collection was packed away, hidden for decades to avoid offending Islamic values. Now, the Eye-to-Eye exhibition is giving Iranians a rare chance to experience art history firsthand. The exhibit has also become a subtle space of defiance, with many women attending without wearing the mandatory hijab.
A lot of people with less exposure to art have discovered the museum for the first time. Experts, artists, and students have visited similar shows multiple times, but we are seeing a part of the community that is discovering art and the museum and seeing the potential of this place, and this is something to be proud of.
The exhibition also showcases Iranian masterpieces from the 19th and 20th centuries, making it an accessible cultural experience amid economic hardships. With tickets costing only 14 US cents, it offers an escape from the country's political and financial struggles.
I'm very happy because works by our classic artists from 150 to 200 years ago are here. This is very attractive for art enthusiasts because not everyone can go and see museums abroad. It's extremely exciting to see the works here.
In a country that has long fought against items like Barbie dolls and depictions of cartoon characters from The Simpsons, this exhibition now serves as a window into the past and a reflection of Iran's shifting present.
Now, those are all of the stories we have for you on this edition of The Rundown. You can always head to i24news.tv for more updates on these developing stories, specifically as we keep an eye on all of the activity coming out of Hezbollah from Lebanon, firing towards northern Israel throughout the day. You can head to our social medias for more updates there. For now, I'm Nicole Zedek, and thanks so much for tuning in.